To accurately hit a moving vehicle, it's not an easy shot to make.
Maybe some type of road rage.
It had to be one of two people who committed the murder.
He's got that pistol in his hand. It's like I just shot it off in the air.
I'll say one thing, I did not pull the trigger.
He's talking in circles with us. He kept playing games. The question is, who do you believe?
When he was on the stand, he was crying. I feel like he told the truth. My sister still has a hard time dealing with it.
There's more to it, you know, other people being involved and not being held accountable.
Something happened that I had never seen happen in court before.
For those most affected by a homicide, the first 48 is just the beginning. This is the story of the fight for justice in the weeks, months, and the Midtown neighborhood. A driver with a dash cam witnesses an accident.
Do you need police, fire, medical?
I'm at Lewis and the VA, and the car just flew to the stop sign and hit a pole. I don't know if there's any injuries. It looks pretty bad.
All right, I've got the call. Please stand and take ma'am.
The driver doesn't survive. He's been shot once in the head.
Hey, Ronnie.
So, is there any type of luck investigations? I'm just not a fan of that word. I feel like you go out and maybe make your own luck by being active and turning over every stone that needs turned over. How'd the call come in?
78?
Correct.
My name is Ronnie Leatherman. I am a retired homicide detective. I am currently a crime and intelligence analyst with the Tulsa Police Department.
I talked to a witness. Her and her husband were traveling eastbound here on 14th, and they said this car came just flying past them on their left. And it went up into the grass, and it shot into the middle of the intersection. She didn't see any other vehicles involved, didn't hear a gunshot.
Okay.
It was really, really cold, and the streets were covered in ice, and I was walking around, breaking the ice to try to find shell casings. My name is Detective Reggie Warren, and I'm a homicide detective for Tulsa Police Department. Not many people out due to the weather. That makes it a lot harder. You don't have any witnesses to the shooting.
Where's he shot at?
The head. There's only one bullet hole in his right here.
The tent's like pushed in.
So that tells me it's coming from the outside going in.
There's blood all over both seats. There was a bullet hole in the back passenger side window and had went through like in the direction of the driver. So I'm thinking there's maybe another car that was next to him. Maybe some type of road rage and someone just pulled up beside him and cranked a round off.
To accurately hit a moving vehicle, it's not an easy shot to make.
It's one of those lucky, unlucky shots.
Emmy will be able to move the body and go through pockets and stuff like that. Hopefully there's an ID. Most important thing is finding out who our victim is, because if all we know is there's someone who's deceased, nothing else to go on, then, I mean, we have nowhere to start with. Once the medical examiners got there, there was an ID in one of his pockets that showed it was Josh Hurd.
37-year-old Joshua Hurd had lived in Oklahoma since he was 5. He enjoyed swimming and played baseball since he was a child. Josh leaves behind his mom, 2 sisters, a 17-year-old daughter, and a 9-year-old son.
I'll be at the office. Start digging around for next to kin.
Three hours into the investigation,
So this will be our victim. He's been in a lot of trouble with us: drugs, burglary, robberies, stolen vehicles, stuff like that. He's been to prison.
After serving 14 months for burglary, Josh was released just a few months ago.
So this will be Erica's phone number, who's the sister.
Okay.
Hello?
Hey, this is Ronnie Leatherwood, the Tulsa Police Department.
What exactly is going on?
It's your brother.
Is he okay or what?
I want to talk to you in person, and I'll answer all your questions that I can. Where can I meet you at? Those situations are always just horrible because you're delivering the worst news that you can deliver to someone, and this is in the middle of the night when we're doing this. Hi, can we come in?
Yeah. Right then I knew, because there was two of them. My whole world stopped for a minute. And that's when they told me, they said, you know, unfortunately, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but your brother was shot and he didn't make it.
My sister's phone was calling me over and over and over, and that's when Erica told me. Then we just drove to my mom's.
I'll never forget, we went into her apartment. What are you doing? What are you guys doing here so late? And I just told her, you're gonna have to turn the light on, Mom. And I just told her, I said, I don't know how to say it. Josh is gone. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
He wasn't just my brother, he was my best friend. I talk to him every day.
You said 14.
Yeah.
12 hours in.
One of the robbery detectives gave me some information that our victim's, one of his ex-girlfriends lives right there on that street where he got shot. Reggie and I are gonna go to see what she has to say. Our starting point was with Josh's ex-girlfriend's house. Keep an eye out for like casing. Maybe something happens there, so let's start and work our way down to where the vehicle ultimately ended up to see if we can find casings that would give us leads to follow up on.
If Josh was the victim of road rage, his last drive may have started here.
No answer. I think that house is where we need to be focused on right now.
13 hours into the investigation, after a neighbor told Josh's ex-girlfriend that detectives were looking for her, she shows up at headquarters.
My name's Ronnie. This is my partner, Reggie. And some information I had gotten this morning was that you and him had some type of relationship. Okay.
I just don't want to lose my...
No, I hear you. And I'm not here trying to do that or anything. Josh's ex was a little nervous, maybe holding back. We're just trying to figure out what happened last night.
Josh, he lived at my house.
She was scared. I think we figured out, yeah, that she knows a little bit more.
He just wants to hang out or whatever. Hard to set boundaries with Josh.
Okay.
Because he doesn't understand that it's like, I just want you to be here for our son. Like, we can be co-parents, and he thinks that's a joke.
She's told us, basically, that there was drama between me and Josh that night.
Your ex was killed literally a few blocks from your house, so we probably need to hit her harder with some questions.
Is he wanting more than just co-parenting, apparently?
Yeah. That's why he got mad yesterday, because he wanted to hang out last night. And then a friend of mine and Dobie come over there.
She says the man she's seeing brought along a friend named Dobie.
And he's like, oh, it looks like you're busy again tonight.
But Josh was angry that she was hanging out with other men.
He starts throwing stuff everywhere, and I'm like, just leave, Josh. Like, just leave. And at my house, Josh knew that there was that there. So I grab it, and I give it.
Josh was the male role in our family because we didn't know our dad. Josh was a good person, and a lot of people here in Tulsa and around Tulsa knew that. But if you just look at his record, you wouldn't think that.
Methamphetamine, that was his issue. He calls it a weakness, and he hated it, so. And it caused him to do time in prison.
Unfortunately, that's why he didn't get to know his son as well as he got to know his daughter, because he was locked up.
He wasn't an angel, you know, he wasn't perfect, and he fought his demons just like everybody else, but he was trying to find his way, and I know this time he was, and he just didn't get that chance. Josh's biggest motivation was his kids. He loved being a dad. I know he was a great, great dad. I mean, all the pictures you see of him, he's with the kids wrestling. If you couldn't find him, that's where he was, with all the little kids in the grass.
This is the letter he wrote. You gonna read that?
While Josh was in prison, he wrote a letter to himself.
You need your glasses, probably.
This is a letter of a relapse prevention plan. It says to Josh, because of your addiction, your whole adult life has been spent in prison. Your children have grown up without you. Your daughter's 17 and doing great. You was gone and you had nothing to do with that. You wasn't there. But guess what? She loves you still after all that time. She's counted down the days for you to come home. Hold on. You're sober, you're happy, and you're motivated. You can do this.
Watch out, movement out.
You've got a lot of life left, a lot of people that are counting on you. Be happy, enjoy your life, and good luck, Josh Hurt. That's a letter to himself, so yeah, that's heartbreaking, actually.
That letter I found with his stuff, like he read it every day, so I think that helped him a lot.
It's definitely hard to know that somebody struggles so hard and yet he didn't get the chance to overcome it, and I know he would have.
"16 hours into the investigation."
There was a gun at my house. I don't want Josh to get a hold of it.
What sense does that make, you giving somebody else the gun so he wouldn't get it?
Dobie's outside talking to him, basically just trying to get him outside. And I tell him, stop, screw it, like, you're escalating.
Why is this gun even in the scenario here? And what the heck is this guy, Dobie, doing there?
Josh is already in his car, peels out, and goes. So my friend gets in his truck, and he goes.
Josh's ex-girlfriend says the man she's seeing followed Josh with his truck and saw him crash.
About 30 minutes later, he comes and gets me and takes me to the hotel.
And what hotel did you guys stay at?
51st and Harbor, right there.
Okay. What else did he tell you about the wreck?
He didn't tell me anything.
So Dobie, what's his real name?
I just know him as Dobie. He just has dark hair, dark eyes. He's shorter than me. Kind of not so stocky, but he's not skinny.
She's like right here on the edge. She knows what happened. It's a matter of us getting it out of her at this point. There's no way she doesn't know more than she's initially told us. She isn't answering all the questions, so I'm thinking that she's potentially involved in this somehow, whether she did it or she put someone else up to it.
Hey, here's the only Dobie and Tracy's when he's taller than her.
Okay.
She's saying he's shorter than her?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the deal. This little part right here can get you wrapped up with holding information about a murder.
He did not tell me anything, sir. I'm telling you that right now.
You would think somebody in a situation like that, about it being her ex, would want to vomit the information to you, but we had to kind of pry it from her. Again, I found it really, really hard to believe.
I called him.
She says after she found out Josh was murdered, she spoke to the man she's seeing.
He said when he was trying to get on the highway, Dobie was hanging out of the window. And my friend said to him, what, and Dobie said, I just shot him.
So Dobie's in the truck hanging out the window and shoots a gun, and then Josh crashes.
That's what he had told me today.
At that point, I didn't feel that we had the whole story, but we had enough to start putting it together and piecing it together.
20 hours in.
All right, bye. She's gonna bring him down here.
A lawyer for the man who's seeing Josh's ex reaches out.
Yeah, if you guys will have a seat over there. Thank you for coming down here.
Where do I start?
You start in the beginning.
I met Dobie because he came over with Josh. They were buddies. Since then, we hung out a little bit. And in the course, I met Josh. Josh and I hung out a few nights together.
He was eager to tell his side of it and kind of clear some things up that we didn't know. I think he was more eager to distance himself from it.
So last night, Dobie calls me. He says Josh is trying to get in the house. And dude, there's a bunch of yelling inside or whatever. And I go inside the house and glass and starts breaking. I go out there, and at that point, Josh got hurt first or something and took off running out the door. She chasing him, and Dobie, I guess, was out there just yelling and stuff. He's like, I'm gonna walk around the block. When I tell her I'm leaving, she says, here, take this, okay? And hands me a pistol. I do carry. I'm not a criminal, so I take it with me. I walk up to my truck. Well, Dobie, he didn't go for a walk, he sat in my truck. He said, can you drop me off? I don't want to be here, I don't want to be in this drama. I just handed him that pistol and told him to put it in the glove box. Well, as I start my truck, Josh backs out. And so I wanted to pull up next to him and make sure he was all right.
If Josh caused all this drama at this house and now he's leaving, great. Let him get away from here. There's no more drama and everybody can go about their night. But the fact that he's following him to make sure he's okay, no, I didn't buy that part of his story.
Well, he took off. So I turned right there to get on the Broken Arrow Expressway there at the on-ramp. And Josh's car shoots out right in front of me. And I'm next to him, and I'm like, hey man, are you all right?
Chasing him to calm him down, you don't need anybody to calm down. You can calm down on your own. That's the reason you leave a situation, to calm down. But I believe that was just a convenient way to say, we were just looking for him so the confrontation could continue.
Then he goes to shoot around me, and I'm like, what the hell? And I look over, and Dobie's hanging halfway out the window. And I'm like, what the are you doing, bro? And I like grab his hoodie, because I thought he was going to fall out of the truck. I pull him back in, and he's like, he was yelling at Josh, pull the over. He's got that pistol in his hand. He's like, I just shot it off in the air.
So did you see him wreck?
Sir, I did not see physically with my eyeballs see him wreck. No, I did not.
Where did you drop Dobie?
I dropped him off in front of the building. After that, I noticed a gun was missing. This time the glove box.
Do you know his real name?
It's Casey something. I don't know his last name.
21 hours since Josh's shooting death.
This guy wanted to give his side of the story, so at this point we're going to let him go and we're going to treat him as a witness. I'm still not completely convinced that this guy that's driving the truck is not involved in this and potentially could have shot. But the other guy that's supposedly involved, he's nowhere to be found. So now the time is to focus on this other guy, get him completely identified and find out who he is.
Good morning, how are you?
Crime analyst Margot Hain-Bell delivers a break in the case.
She is able to start digging into some Department of Corrections records, Facebook, and ultimately, Margot's able to identify this Dobie guy.
He goes by Casey McKee. That is an alias. His real name is Casey Davis.
Casey J.
35-year-old Casey Davis has prior convictions for domestic abuse, drug possession, and larceny. He's been in and out of prison for the last 17 years. Casey has a 3-year-old son.
He just got out in October.
All right, thanks. Bye.
But to make an arrest, Hayne Bell's ID needs to be confirmed.
Now that we have this DOC photo, I want to show that photo to our witnesses from last night.
Leatherman and Warren head to the house of Josh's ex-girlfriend.
This is cold.
It is. Yeah, it is.
She may be at that hotel. We may go check down there.
Okay.
As the first 48 winds down,
So both of our witnesses were together. We separated both of them and presented them with pictures of Casey, AKA Dobie, and both of them identified him as the guy that's involved in this case. After we've done these photo lineups, we had probable cause to make an arrest on Casey Davis for killing Josh. I'm gonna let the warrants guys know and get him into custody and get his side of this story.
Eight days later,
Warrant Squad sent me a message. The Podo Police Department, which is down in southeast Oklahoma, got a call last night of a guy knocking on a door, asking the homeowner for a machete or a hatchet. And they thought that was weird, so they called the police.
Obviously, a lot of criminals not smart. That was a dumb move. It was like he wanted to get caught.
The police get there, and the guy takes off running, and they catch him, and it ends up being Casey. He's in the LaFleur County Jail, and Reggie and I are gonna go down there, and hopefully he'll tell us what he did and why he did it. Okay.
This one?
The reason we're here is to give you a chance to tell your side of the story.
I got some words to say. I am going to do the right thing. I mean, you know, I am a backsliding preacher.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like ain't nobody sit down and told you the story step by step, what happened.
Will you tell me today whether or not you shot?
I'll say one thing.
Okay.
I did not pull the trigger.
Will you tell me who did pull the trigger?
Not at this time. But I'm just as guilty.
I hear you.
I could have stopped it.
I didn't pull the trigger, but I'm just as guilty. Well, what does that mean? Explain that. Well, what did you do to make yourself guilty?
I'll answer what I feel comfortable with.
Okay.
Maybe.
My interview with him was frustrating at times. He's talking in circles with us. He kept playing games. You said you didn't pull the trigger, and just being straight up with you and using our logic, the person that had to be is...
Leatherman asks Casey if the man seeing Josh's ex was the shooter.
I
know you're not saying that. I'm just telling you.
I mean, but if it comes down to where I can get me a bond reduction, then that'd be something I'll sit down and tell everything.
He knew the game, and he knew what to say and what not to say to us. But we knew that was a bunch of crap.
I'm 35 years old with 17 calendar years in prison. Prison is all I know.
Being locked up is their way of life. And it's sad, but it's the truth.
My son does not know me.
How old's your son?
He's 3. I was a preacher in prison and started a church in prison. God came to me in a dream one night and casted demons out of me. Woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I read the New Testament in 4 days. I did not eat, I did not sleep. So I've still made church every time the doors open. That's where I found my peace.
First-degree murder requires evidence that the person had deliberate intent to commit the homicide. My name is John Jerrichman. I'm an assistant district attorney in Tulsa County. This is a difficult case because it had to be one of 2 people who committed the murder. Are you going to believe the eyewitness who was the driver? Or are you going to believe Casey Davis, who fled to a different county?
These 2 people were there when this happened. The question is, who do you believe? I've sat down with the DA and discussed this case with them, and they've decided that the guy who's dating Josh's ex, he cooperated in this investigation. He came forward, told a story. It made sense and matches up with some of the evidence that we have, so he's not going to get charged. As a result, Casey Davis is going to get charged with homicide.
Now, 88 Jeersma has 4 months to prep for a preliminary hearing that will determine whether his case will go to trial.
The evidence that we had that showed deliberate intent was the fact that Casey Davis fired a gunshot into the car of a person he had previously had an issue with. But we were heavily reliant on an eyewitness, the driver who was seeing Josh's ex.
The person who reached out to us who didn't run is the one, in my opinion, was more believable. And so ultimately that was just a huge factor in this case.
If we took this case to trial, the jury would ultimately have to believe him beyond a reasonable doubt. So our next steps were to evaluate the witness's credibility. When I met with him, he was real straightforward and honest, in my opinion. He didn't seem like he had anything to hide. I felt good about the case. At a preliminary hearing, if the judge finds that the case lacks probable cause, then the case could get dismissed outright, or charges that we have filed could get dismissed.
For the victim's family, it's the first time seeing Casey Davis face to face.
I think I was expecting to see a monster or somebody, and it was just this little short guy.
Wow, he's not a monster. He's a cowardly waste of space. That's my very first thought.
The first to take the stand is the driver who was seeing Josh's ex.
His testimony at the preliminary hearing was to establish that Casey Davis was in the passenger seat. Casey had a gun in his hand. He sticks his body out of the car, and he said, "I only fired one gunshot." I thought the driver's testimony was very clear and very credible.
And then he asked our court advocate lady if he could speak with us, and he came over and gave me a hug.
I didn't want to talk to him, because at the end of the day, you drove the truck. That's how I looked at it. You drove the truck with the guy that shot my brother. I think there's more to it. He was involved in not being held accountable.
Casey's side of the story.
The defense theory was to demonstrate the relationship between Josh's ex and the driver, and somehow show that he had a motive based on a possible romantic relationship between the two, that they were conspiring to basically get rid of Josh so that they could be together. That was part of the defense's theory.
The result of the preliminary hearing.
The judge did not think that we met our burden for probable cause on the murder in the first degree. And so he dismissed that charge. We have an avenue to appeal that decision, and the district court judge ruled in the state's favor that we had presented sufficient evidence of probable cause to support a charge of murder in the first degree. But it certainly was cause to take a step back and look at the evidence. There were still some major hurdles we would have to climb.
The prosecution's case had been riding on the driver of the truck as its key witness. Now, that could be a risky strategy.
I learned that our driver had been an eyewitness in a different homicide that was being prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. That causes questions of credibility, and that tends to suggest that he's not hanging around with the greatest of folks.
He also reached out to Josh's family.
The driver came and saw me the night before preliminary. And he told me that he didn't have anything to do with it. He was crying tears, it was sad.
It's not good when we have witnesses tracking down family and telling them things. It needs to come out in the courtroom when they testify.
It would be inappropriate because there is a rule that prevents witnesses from talking to other potential witnesses about their testimony.
Jeersma is beginning to have some doubts about winning a jury trial.
there would be questions in a jury's mind about a number of things. The two would have been pointing fingers at each other, and they both probably would have denied responsibility for having fired the shot. So we certainly have questions about our likelihood of conviction.
If this case goes to trial, a guilty verdict might be a long shot.
Having a preliminary hearing magistrate find that there was insufficient evidence of probable cause, it did suggest that there would be a good reason to want to negotiate a plea deal.
Defense and prosecution arrive at an agreement.
And ultimately, Casey Davis pled guilty to felony murder in the second degree. He also pled guilty to possession of a firearm after former commission of a felony.
15 months after Josh's shooting death, the court is ready to deliver a sentence.
We're here for sentencing today for Casey Davis, who killed my son. He took a plea, and I want to put it behind us now. My son can rest in peace. I'm trying to smile, but I'm still sad, hurt, and I still feel like part of me is missing.
I can't recall a time where I've seen more people than were present for Casey's sentencing.
The whole court was full of people. They had on their T-shirts. They were representing the victim's family.
He had a lot of good friends. I wanted them to be there. I wanted that courtroom to be packed. I wanted that guy to see that he could never touch being who my son is, even in death.
Josh's mom waits for Casey Davis as he makes his way to the courtroom.
And I got to see the look on his face when he walked off that elevator.
She wanted Casey to see how many people supported Josh. So she got that. I think I was just happy for my mom.
It was amazing. Courtroom was packed.
All right, Mr. Davis, you have reached an agreement with the state of Oklahoma in this matter, Mr. Davis. If you plead guilty on count 1, you would be sentenced to serve 20 years. On count 2, you would be sentenced to serve 10 years and for a total of 30 years. Understand? Okay. I will state that I will accept your plea, and at this time I will ask the state if it has any additional victim impact statements.
There are 3 direct relatives who would like to read a statement. So I would ask Erica Fifield to read her statement.
And if you want to see here.
Josh's family was certainly very emotional. There was a lot of love there. There was certainly a lot of grief.
No one should have ever told their parents their child was murdered. Our lives will never be the same to avoid the numbness, hurt, pain, tears, etc. will never go away. When that bullet took my brother's life, it took a piece of my identity.
Casey didn't react, always hung his head down. Casey never made eye contact with us.
I never thought my parents would die so early on in my life. Before I could see me get my first car, graduate high school, I want to be able to meet my babies that I have in the future. I just want to see all the goals I achieved before he died.
You would have thought that he would have looked up when my granddaughter read her statement. She read it to him, and he still just looked at the ground. I couldn't believe it. He just had no emotion whatsoever.
I can never forgive you because to me, forgiveness means to forget, and I will never forget my brother.
No other statements to be read, Your Honor.
The whole courtroom was crying in tears. It was very moving.
All the people that are close to Josh said he was trying to get himself together. Reintegrating yourself from prison, I can only imagine could be tough. But Casey, that's all he knows. He's going back home. He's going back to prison. He's accepted the fact that he is only meant for prison.
There's so many people in prison that get out and they have nothing. They have nowhere to go. They have nothing. Josh has no idea what that's like because he always had a home. He always had family.
Anything further at this time, Mr. Gertzman?
No, I have a seat.
Anything further?
But the hearing isn't over yet.
After the victim impact statements were read, something happened that I had never seen happen in court before.
Judge, the only thing that we have, Mr. Davis has prepared a letter that I'm going to give to Angie so that she may give that to the family later so that they can have it if they'd like to read it.
The victim's family receiving a letter like this could open up way more questions than we could ever have answers to.
I'll just ask that the victim advocate review the letter, make sure, and or Mr. Gertzman review, make sure it's appropriate for the family to hear or to read.
Angie was actually crying, and she hugged me and she said, "Please don't read that letter."
They had already went through so much just reading their victim impact statements.
But Josh's mother ignores Angie's warning.
I ended up reading it for one reason, because my daughter, Megan, was so upset. So this is a letter from Casey Davis. He talks about a driver. It says, "To Josh's family, I want you to know the real story. Came up with 2 guns. He handed me one of them and said, 'Hope you're ready. Let's go kill this MF.' We get into truck and catch up with Josh. Starts waving his gun at me, screaming at me to just shoot the car. I lean back out the truck, aim above Josh's car, leans out, and we shoot. I pray that knowing the truth about what happened helps you. I also pray you let the truth be known. Respects, Casey."
You see it, baby?
It was right here.
How dare you take my brother's life and then write a letter that states that you're innocent?
And I thought, well, that's just one more jab. But to see my daughter get so upset over it, it really pissed me off. Us 3 are not on the same page with all of this at all. I think there's more to it. A driver being involved and not being held accountable. The driver was one of my son's friends. I really believe in my heart that he didn't have anything to do with it. And that's how I feel.
Got this rock right here. I do feel that justice was served because the person who pulled the trigger is locked up. But my sister still has a hard time dealing with it.
Well, here, what is this one? Can we move this rock?
I find it hard for Casey to hit that shot. Even if it were 1 in a million, I just find it hard for him to get that shot. I could see more of it coming from the driver's side, to be honest.
Remember when he had the rat tail? And you called him Rat Boy? We've always been a tight-knit family. Whether we've been doing good or bad, wrong or right, we've always been close. So that's one thing that we've always had. And when you lose somebody like that at the hands of somebody else, it makes you cherish what little bit of time you do have together.
Look, you two, Mom, you two are always together.
That's what family does, is you're just there for each other, and that's what you should do. I know my brother's in heaven, and I know he's not in pain.
California, 1986. cold case solved, forgotten evidence triggers shocking arrest. The evidence had been sitting in a cardboard box for nearly 40 years. No warning, no dramatic label, just a faded case number, a cracked evidence seal, and a name that almost nobody in California remembered anymore. Then, one morning in 2025, a detective opened that box, looked at what was inside, and realized something terrifying. The answer had been there all along. In the summer of 1986, the small California community of Arroyo Vista woke to a disappearance that would become one of the strangest mysteries in the county. 24-year-old Elena Marquez had left her apartment shortly after 9 on a warm July evening. She told her roommate she was going to meet someone at a roadside diner on the eastern edge of town. She never came home. Her car was discovered the next morning. It was parked beneath a row of eucalyptus trees beside an abandoned service road. The driver's door was unlocked. The headlights were off. Her purse was still inside. Her keys were on the floor. A half-finished cup of coffee sat in the center console. But Elena was gone. There was no blood, no broken glass, no obvious struggle, no note. The first officers who arrived believed they were looking at a missing person case. By sunset, that assumption had begun to collapse. Elena's family insisted she would never disappear voluntarily. She had a steady job at a medical supply company. She was taking night classes. She had plans for the following weekend. Her paycheck had been deposited. Her apartment was untouched. Her passport remained in a drawer. Someone had made her disappear. The question was who? Investigators began with a diner Elena had mentioned. The waitress remembered seeing her. She had arrived alone shortly after 9:30. She ordered coffee and pie. She sat near the window. Then a man joined her. The waitress remembered almost nothing about him except that he wore a dark jacket despite the heat and kept his back toward the room. They talked for approximately 20 minutes. At 10:04 p.m., Elena left with him. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. Police searched the surrounding roads. Deputies checked drainage canals, fields, vacant properties, and stretches of dry woodland. Volunteers joined the search. Helicopters circled the hill. Nothing. Then, 3 days later, investigators found Elena's earrings near the service road where her car had been discovered. One was lying beneath a eucalyptus tree. The other was found nearly 30 feet away. Suddenly, the case was no longer a disappearance. It was a homicide investigation without a body. Detectives questioned everyone Elena knew: her former boyfriend, co-workers, neighbors, friends from school, family members. Every person who could have had a reason to hurt her was examined. One name surfaced repeatedly: Daniel Reeves. He had dated Elena 6 months earlier. The relationship had ended badly. According to friends, Reeves had struggled to accept the breakup. But Reeves had an alibi. He claimed he was working an overnight shift at a warehouse that evening. His supervisor confirmed it. 2 co-workers remembered seeing him shortly before midnight. The detectives suspected the alibi was too convenient. They questioned him again. He denied meeting Elena. He denied knowing where she was. He denied having anything to do with her disappearance. No physical evidence connected him to the crime. The investigation slowed, then stopped. Years passed. Arroyo Vista changed. Businesses disappeared. Roads were widened. New houses replaced empty lots. The diner closed. The service road became part of a construction project. Elena's parents grew older. Her mother continued keeping Elena's bedroom exactly as it had been. Every birthday brought the same ritual: a candle, a photograph, an empty chair, and the same unanswered question: where was Elena? By the early 1990s, the case file had become one of hundreds sitting in a county evidence room. By the early 2000s, the detectives who had worked the case were retired. By 2010, almost nobody involved in the original investigation was still working. But one person had never stopped looking. Detective Marcus Hale had joined the department decades after Elena disappeared. He first heard her name during a cold case review in 2018. The file bothered him, not because it was unusual, because it was incomplete. Pages were missing. Evidence logs contained handwritten correction. Photographs were poorly cataloged. Several witness interviews had never been digitized. Hale requested the original evidence. He received 3 boxes. 2 contained paperwork. The third contained physical evidence. Most of it had already been tested, but one item caught his attention: a dark blue jacket. It had been collected from the trunk of Elena's car. The original report described it as possibly belonging to an unknown male. Nothing else. No owner had ever been identified. The jacket had apparently been forgotten. Hale sent it for modern forensic testing. The results were inconclusive. Then came the second test, and this time the laboratory found something. A microscopic biological trace had survived inside one of the JACKETS. The sample was degraded, but not useless. Investigators built a partial DNA profile. It did not match Daniel Reeves. It did not match Elena. It did not match anyone in the state database. The case remained unsolved until an investigator noticed something else. The jacket had never actually been photographed inside Elena's car. The original evidence log showed it had been found in the trunk, but another handwritten note placed it on the back seat. Someone had moved it. That tiny contradiction opened a door. Detectives returned to the original crime scene. The eucalyptus trees were gone. The service road had changed, but old property maps showed that one building had remained: a small maintenance garage. In 1986, it had been operated by a man named Thomas Keller. Keller had never appeared prominently in the original case. He had been interviewed once. His statement was 3 paragraphs long. He claimed he had seen nothing unusual that night. He said he closed the garage at 8. He went home. He watched television. He went to sleep. That was his story for nearly 40 years. But Hale discovered that Keller had died in 2011. So investigators turned to his family. His daughter agreed to speak with them. During the interview, she mentioned something that made the room go silent. Her father had owned a dark blue work jacket. He had worn it almost every day, and after 1986, he had suddenly thrown it away. She remembered because he never threw anything away. The detectives asked when. She couldn't give an exact date, but she remembered the reason. Her father had told her the jacket had been ruined. That detail sent investigators back to the laboratory. The DNA profile from the jacket was compared with genetic material obtained from Keller's surviving relative. The result was devastating. The probability was overwhelming. The unknown male trace was consistent with Thomas Keller, but that still did not prove murder. It proved only that Keller had been in contact with the jacket. Then came the forgotten evidence. Inside the cardboard box was a cassette tape. The label was faded. The handwriting belonged to the original lead detective. The tape had never been transcribed. Investigators digitized it. At first, there was nothing. Questions. Answers. Static. Then Keller's voice appeared. He was being interviewed in 1986. He sounded calm, almost bored. But when the detective asked whether he knew Elena Marquez, his breathing changed. There was a pause. Then he said no. The detective asked again. Keller repeated the answer. Then came a question nobody remembered asking. Did you see her car? Keller said no. But the original report stated that Keller had told investigators he saw the car near the service road. The contradiction was enormous. Why had his statement changed? And why had nobody noticed? Investigators searched Keller's old property records. They found that the maintenance garage had contained a private storage area. That area had never been searched in 1986. The building was demolished in 1998, but the property records revealed something unexpected. Keller had rented a storage unit approximately 12 miles away. The unit remained active for more than 20 years. A relative had recently cleared it. Investigators contacted the storage company. There were no remaining belongings, but archived photographs from the clearance process still existed. One photograph showed a rusted metal trunk. Inside it was a folded newspaper from July 1986. The headline concerned Elena's disappearance. Beside it was a small brass key. The key was traced to a lockbox. The lockbox was eventually recovered from Keller's former residence. Inside were personal items: a watch, a photograph, and a handwritten note. Only 7 words. She knew what I had done. The note did not identify Elena. It did not explain what Keller had done, but investigators now had motive, opportunity, physical evidence, and a witness contradiction. They reopened the entire case. Then they discovered something even more disturbing. Elena had not been randomly chosen. 3 weeks before her disappearance, she had filed a complaint against a supplier connected to the medical company where she worked. The supplier had been accused of falsifying invoices. Elena had discovered irregularity. One name appeared repeatedly in the record: Thomas Keller. His maintenance company had been receiving payments from the supplier. The amounts were small, but the pattern was consistent. Elena had apparently noticed, and she had told a co-worker she was worried someone might be following her. That co-worker had never been interviewed in 1986. She was located in Oregon. When investigators showed her Elena's photograph, she immediately remembered the conversation. Elena had been frightened. She had said someone was pressuring her to stop asking questions. She never mentioned Keller by name, but she described his vehicle, a faded brown pickup. Keller owned one. The same vehicle had been seen near Elena's apartment 2 days before she vanished. The evidence was finally forming a shape, not a random disappearance, not a runaway, not an accident, a planned confrontation. But investigators still needed Elena. Without a body, the case remained difficult. Then another piece of forgotten evidence surfaced: a 1986 search map. Someone had marked a remote canyon outside Arroyo Vista with a red circle. There was no explanation. The handwriting did not belong to the lead detective. It belonged to a deputy who had died years earlier. Investigators examined old dispatch records. At 2:17 a.m. on the night Elena disappeared, a patrol officer had reported hearing what sounded like a vehicle traveling deep into the canyon. The report had been classified as unrelated. The officer had never connected it to Elena. Now detectives returned to the location. The canyon had changed little. After a week of searching, cadaver dogs alerted near an area of disturbed soil. Excavators were brought in. They found fragments of clothing, a piece of jewelry, and finally human remains. Dental records confirmed the identity: Elena Marquez. 39 years after she disappeared, she had finally been found. The discovery transformed the investigation. Forensic examination revealed evidence consistent with homicide. The medical examiner could not determine every detail. Too much time had passed, but the conclusion was clear. Elena had not left voluntarily. She had been killed. Thomas Keller was already dead. He could never stand trial. But investigators continued. The DNA evidence from the jacket, the witness statements, the financial records, the Cosette recording, the storage unit material, and the location of Elena's remains created a chain that investigators believed established Keller's involvement beyond reasonable doubt. Then came the arrest, not of Keller, of someone nobody had expected: Daniel Reeves, the former boyfriend, the man investigators had suspected in 1986. He was still alive. He was living under a different surname in another California county, and new forensic testing had identified his DNA on an object recovered near Elena's remains. Reeves had spent decades insisting he had nothing to do with Elena's disappearance. Now investigators believed he had helped Keller cover it up. When detectives arrived at his home, he was 71 years old. He opened the door. He saw the badges. And according to investigators, his first words were simple: "I wondered when you'd come." The arrest shocked the community. For decades, people had assumed the case was forgotten. It wasn't. It had been waiting. Waiting inside boxes. Waiting on Cosette tape. Waiting in handwriting nobody bothered to read. Waiting in a jacket nobody thought mattered. Waiting beneath the ground. And when the forgotten evidence was finally assembled, the mystery that had haunted Arroyo Vista for nearly 40 years began to collapse. Elena's family received the news in a quiet room. There was no celebration. There was only grief. Her mother had died years earlier without knowing where her daughter was. Her father had carried the question until his final day. The arrest could not change that. The discovery could not restore the lost years. But for the first time, Elena's story had an ending that was not simply disappearance. She had been found. Her name was no longer attached to an empty file. Her photograph was no longer accompanied by the words "missing since 1986." The case was now officially classified as solved, but the most disturbing detail remained. The evidence had been there from the beginning. The jacket, the tape, the map, the financial records, the witness. None of it was invisible. None of it was destroyed. It was simply overlooked. For 39 years, the truth had been buried, not because nobody searched, but because nobody knew where to look. And somewhere in the old evidence room, that cardboard box had waited in silence while the people connected to it grew old and disappeared. The investigators eventually placed the original case file into a new archive. The evidence was preserved. The cassette was digitized. The photographs were restored. Elena's name was entered into the department's memorial records, and the final report contained a sentence that captured the tragedy of the entire investigation. The case had not been impossible to solve. It had been impossible to see. For the people of Arroyo Vista, the story remains a warning. Cold cases do not always die. Sometimes they sleep. Sometimes the answer is sitting inches away from the people searching for it. Sometimes a forgotten piece of evidence waits through decades of dust, changing detectives, changing buildings, changing technology, waiting for one person to ask the question that should have been asked in the beginning. Who put the jacket there? Who moved it? Who lied? Who knew? And why did Elena never make it home? In 1986, those questions had no answer. In 2025, they finally had names. But the silence surrounding Elena Marquez had lasted almost 40 years. And even after the arrest, even after the remains were recovered, even after the old evidence was brought into the light, one truth remained impossible to escape. Time does not erase a crime. It only makes the truth harder to recognize. Sometimes the evidence is still there. Sometimes the killer is gone. Sometimes the witnesses have forgotten. And sometimes, buried inside an ordinary cardboard box, there is one final piece of the past waiting to speak. California, 1986. Cold case solved. Forgotten evidence triggers shocking arrest. The night Elena Marquez disappeared had never made sense. For 39 years, detectives had tried to reconstruct it from fragments: a diner receipt, a missing vehicle, a witness who remembered a stranger's jacket, a service road beneath eucalyptus trees. And somewhere between those fragments was the moment when Elena stopped being a woman driving home and became a name printed on a missing person poster. But the newly reopened investigation revealed something nobody had understood in 1986. Elena had not simply vanished. Someone had created a false trail, and the first person to follow it was the police. At 10:04 p.m., Elena walked out of the diner. The waitress remembered the movement clearly. Elena had pushed her chair back, picked up her purse, and looked toward the parking lot. The man in the dark jacket followed several seconds later. The waitress assumed they knew each other. That assumption became one of the most important mistakes in the investigation, because Elena had not arrived at the diner to meet a boyfriend. She had arrived because someone had called her. The phone records were discovered decades later. In 1986, investigators had obtained records from Elena's apartment line. They found several calls that evening, but the records were incomplete. Long-distance calls were documented. Local calls were not always preserved. A surviving telephone company archive eventually revealed that Elena had received a call at 8:43 p.m. The call lasted 2 minutes and 17 seconds. The number belonged to a payphone outside a gas station approximately 4 miles from the diner. That gas station had closed years earlier. The building was gone. The records were almost forgotten. But the discovery changed the timeline. Elena had not spontaneously decided to meet someone. Someone had contacted her. Someone had convinced her to leave. And whoever made that call knew exactly where she would be. Investigators began reconstructing the hours before her disappearance. At 6:12 p.m., Elena left work. At 6:48, she stopped at a grocery store. At 7:19, she returned home. At 8:43, the mysterious call came. At 9:07, she left her apartment. At 9:31, she entered the diner. At 10:04, she walked outside. At 10:17, her car was seen leaving the parking lot. At 10:42, a patrol officer reported a brown pickup truck near the service road. At 2:17 a.m., another officer reported hearing a vehicle entering the canyon. By sunrise, Elena was gone. The timeline was now precise enough to expose something terrifying. There was almost no gap. Whoever took Elena had moved quickly. The next question was whether she knew the person. Investigators believed she did. The diner waitress had remembered something else. Nearly 4 decades earlier, she had told detectives that Elena appeared nervous when the man sat down, but that detail never appeared in the official report. When investigators found the waitress again, she was 83 years old. She lived quietly outside Sacramento. At first, she said she remembered very little. Then detectives showed her a photograph. It was an old image of Thomas Keller. The waitress stared at it. She did not speak. Then she pointed at the photograph. That was him. The room went silent. She remembered the dark jacket. She remembered the way he sat. And she remembered something she had never told police. Keller had placed a small envelope on the table. Elena had opened it. Then her face changed. She looked frightened. The waitress assumed it was a bill or a letter. Now investigators believed it may have contained a threat. The waitress, said Elena, had folded the paper and put it inside her purse. Then Keller leaned toward her. They spoke for less than a minute. Elena stood. She followed him outside. That was the last moment anyone saw her alive. Investigators searched surviving financial records connected to Keller. The results were astonishing. Keller's company had been struggling financially in 1986. Yet during the months surrounding Elena's disappearance, several unexplained deposits appeared in his business account. Small amounts, then larger ones. Payments from companies Elena had been examining. The pattern suggested someone was paying Keller for services that were never clearly documented. But there was more. 3 days after Elena vanished, Keller purchased a used industrial freezer. He paid cash. The freezer was later sold. The buyer had died. The unit itself had been destroyed. Another dead end. Or so it seemed. Investigators found the original sales invoice. The delivery address was not Keller's home. It was the maintenance garage. The same garage beside the service road. The same property where Keller claimed he had never seen Elena. That contradiction became impossible to ignore. Detectives obtained old photographs of the garage. Inside was a concrete floor, a workbench, shelves, and a locked storage room. That room had never been searched. In 1986, detectives had considered the garage irrelevant. Now they knew Elena's car had been found less than 200 yards away. Investigators examined old construction records. The garage had been demolished decades earlier, but its foundation remained beneath a newer commercial property. Ground-penetrating radar revealed several unusual areas beneath the old slab. Nothing was recovered. Still, the search confirmed something. The garage had contained a hidden space, a narrow service pit beneath the floor. It had been sealed sometime after 1986. Investigators found no remains there, but they found fragments of old carpet. Laboratory testing was attempted. The samples were badly degraded. Yet one fragment contained traces of human blood. The profile was too incomplete for identification. The blood type was consistent with Elena. It was not enough for court, but it was enough to keep digging. Meanwhile, detectives returned to Daniel Reeve. The former boyfriend had always insisted that he had not seen Elena that night. His original alibi was based on warehouse records, but the records had a problem. The overnight shift sheet had been handwritten. The signature belonged to a supervisor who had died in 2003. Investigators located another employee who had worked that shift. He remembered Reeves, but not at the warehouse. He remembered seeing Reeves outside around 11 p.m. The employee had assumed Reeves was on a break, but the warehouse was almost 2 miles from the diner, and Reeves had claimed he never left. Investigators compared the timeline. At 10:17 p.m., Elena's car was seen leaving the diner. At approximately 10:42, the brown pickup was seen near the service road. At 11:03, a witness reported a dark sedan traveling toward the warehouse. The sedan matched Reeves's vehicle. The alibi was collapsing. But why? What did Reeves have to do with Keller? The answer was buried in Elena's personal file, a notebook. Only 12 pages remained. Most contained ordinary notes about work, dates, invoices, names, telephone numbers. Then investigators found a page with 2 names written beside each other: Thomas Keller, Daniel Reeves. Below them were 3 words. Both know why. There was no explanation, no date, no context. But Elena had apparently connected the 2 men. Detectives began examining their relationship. They discovered that Reeves had known Keller through a mutual acquaintance. The 2 men had worked on a construction project together years earlier. That connection had never appeared in the original investigation. More troubling was the discovery of a phone call between them on the afternoon Elena disappeared. The call lasted 11 minutes. Another call occurred 2 hours later. Then another, at 8:31 p.m., 12 minutes before Elena received the mysterious payphone call. The investigators now believe the disappearance had been coordinated. Elena was called. She was directed to the diner. Keller met her. Reeves may have followed. And somewhere between the diner and the canyon, Elena disappeared. But investigators still needed to explain the most important evidence: the jacket. Modern testing showed Keller's DNA, but Elena's DNA was also present. That meant the jacket had been in direct contact with her. A new forensic examination revealed fibers from Elena's clothing embedded in the jackets. The pattern suggested a struggle. The jacket was not merely near her, it had touched her. And suddenly the old photograph of Keller's dark jacket became more than a witness memory. It became physical evidence. The investigators then examined the earrings found near the service road. One earring contained microscopic traces of sole. The second contained fibers matching the carpet from Keller's garage. Again, the evidence was old. Again, it had survived. And again, nobody had connected it. The case was no longer a collection of unanswered questions. It was becoming a chain. The chain led directly to Keller. But Keller was dead. So investigators asked a different question: who had helped him? That question brought them back to Daniel Reeves. In 2025, detectives quietly obtained a court-authorized DNA sample from Reeves. The result was not public. It was devastating. His DNA was consistent with biological material recovered from an object found near Elena's remains. Reeves was no longer simply a former boyfriend with a suspicious alibi. He was now physically connected to the final location. Investigators confronted him. At first, he denied everything. He said he had not seen Elena in nearly a year. He said he had never known Thomas Keller well. He said the investigators were building a case from memories that were almost 40 years old. Then detectives placed the cassette recorder on the table. They played Keller's 1986 interview. Reeves listened. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Then the recording reached the question about Elena's car. Keller denied seeing it. Reeves suddenly interrupted. "That's not what he told me." The detective stopped the recording. Reeves realized what he had said. The room became completely silent. He had just placed himself inside the investigation. He had just acknowledged a private conversation with a man he claimed barely knew. Investigators asked him what Keller had told him. Reeves refused to answer. They asked again. He remained silent. Then they showed him Elena's photograph. His expression changed. For the first time, after nearly 4 decades, the wall began to crack. Reeves eventually admitted he had seen Elena that night. He claimed Keller had asked him to help move her vehicle. He insisted he did not know Keller intended to kill her, but detectives did not believe the story because Reeves had lied for 39 years, and his lies had protected more than himself. They had protected the secret of what happened to Elena. The arrest warrant was prepared. Reeves was taken into custody. News of the arrest spread through California. For the community, it was a shock. For Elena's surviving relatives, it was something more complicated. Relief, anger, grief, and disbelief. A case they had watched fade from headlines had suddenly returned. Old photographs appeared again. Old newspaper clippings resurfaced. People who had forgotten Elena's name began asking the same question. How had it taken so long? The answer was painful. The truth had not been hidden in one place. It had been scattered across decades. One clue in a forgotten evidence box, another in an old telephone archive, another in a handwritten notebook, another in the memory of an elderly waitress, another on a Cosette tape, another beneath the remains of a demolished garage, and another inside the memory of a man who had spent nearly 40 years believing time would protect him. But time had done the opposite. It had preserved the evidence. It had preserved the records. It had preserved the contradiction. And eventually, technology caught up with the past. The cold case that had once seemed impossible was no longer impossible. It was simply unfinished. And when investigators finally placed every forgotten piece on the table, the silence surrounding Elena Marquez began to break. Not with a confession, not with a dramatic discovery in the middle of the night, but with something much more frightening. A box that had never been opened carefully enough, a tape that had never been listened to closely enough, and evidence that had been waiting for someone to remember that even after 39 years, the truth was still there. California, 1986. Cold case solved. Forgotten evidence triggers shocking arrest. By the time detectives understood what the old evidence was telling them, the original investigation had already become a maze of contradictions. Every answer seemed to create another question. Every witness remembered something different. Every document carried a small inconsistency that had been ignored because, in 1986, nobody knew which details would matter. Now they did. And the most dangerous detail was not hidden in the evidence room. It was hidden in the timeline. Investigators rebuilt the night Elena Marquez disappeared minute by minute. They pulled telephone records from archived databases, reconstructed patrol routes, reviewed old weather reports, and compared witness statements that had been written almost 40 years apart. The temperature that evening had remained above 80 degrees. The sky was clear. Visibility was excellent. There had been almost no traffic after 10. That meant anyone moving a vehicle through the eastern roads would have stood out. Yet several people had reported seeing a brown pickup. Nobody had connected it to Elena. The first sighting occurred near the diner. The second happened near the service road. The third was reported approximately 30 minutes later. 3 sightings, 1 vehicle, 1 night, and 1 man who had claimed he never left his garage. Thomas Keller. The problem was that Keller was dead. His death had occurred 14 years before detectives reopened the case. There would be no interrogation, no courtroom confession, no confrontation, only the trail he had left behind. Investigators began examining Keller's life during the months before Elena disappeared. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He operated a small maintenance company. He had a modest house. He paid his bills. He had no major criminal record. Neighbors described him as quiet, helpful, private, the kind of man nobody noticed. But underneath that ordinary image was a second life. Keller had been moving money between several businesses. The transactions were disguised as equipment rentals and repair fees. Some invoices were legitimate. Others were almost certainly fabricated. Elena had discovered the pattern. Her notebook proved that. But detectives still did not know what she had discovered. That answer came from an old co-worker named Patricia Lane. Lane had worked beside Elena at the medical supply company. In 1986, she was 26. She remembered Elena as ambitious, careful, extremely organized. Elena did not accuse people casually. If she wrote someone's name down, she had evidence. Lane told investigators that Elena had spent several weeks comparing supplier invoices against delivery records. She noticed equipment being billed twice, then 3 times. Some deliveries had never happened. The money was disappearing through shell transactions. One of the companies involved had subcontracted maintenance work to Keller. Elena believed Keller was not merely receiving fraudulent payments. She believed he was helping move the money. But there was another name, Daniel Reeves. Reeves had worked briefly for one of the subcontractors. He had access to invoices. He knew the warehouse schedules. He knew which deliveries existed and which did not. Elena had apparently confronted him. Lane remembered the conversation. Elena told her Reeves had become angry. He said she should stop digging. She laughed at first. Then she realized he was serious. That was when she became afraid. Lane, said Elena, eventually told her, "If something happens to me, look at the invoices. Those words had never appeared in the original police file. Why? Because Lane had never been interviewed. She had been listed as a co-worker, but detectives never contacted her. Her name was buried in an employee directory. The omission stunned the cold case team. A woman who had potentially received a direct warning from Elena had been overlooked for nearly 40 years. Investigators asked Lane why she had never contacted police. She said she had tried. She called the department after Elena disappeared. A dispatcher told her someone would contact her. Nobody did. She called again. Still nothing. Eventually, she stopped. She assumed police already knew. That assumption haunted her for decades. Now, sitting across from detectives, she remembered one more detail. The afternoon before Elena disappeared, Reeves came to the office. He was not supposed to be there. He asked for Elena. She was in another room. Lane watched him wait. He seemed angry. Then Keller arrived. The two men spoke privately outside. Lane could not hear the conversation, but she remembered Reeves looking toward the window. She remembered Keller pointing toward Elena's office. And she remembered something else. Keller was wearing the same dark blue jacket later found in Elena's car. That statement strengthened the case, but detectives still had no direct proof that Keller had killed Elena. Then the old telephone records gave them something new. The payphone call to Elena's apartment had been made from a gas station. Investigators examined the station's archived employee records. One name appeared, a night attendant named Samuel Ortiz. Ortiz was alive. He was 90 years old. When investigators contacted him, he initially said he remembered nothing from 1986. Then they mentioned the date. His memory changed. He remembered a man using the payphone. The man had been agitated. He had inserted several coins. He made the call. Then he walked toward a brown pickup. Ortiz remembered the pickup because one headlight was dim. He had mentioned the problem to the driver. The driver became irritated. Ortiz said he could not remember the man's face, but he remembered the voice. Investigators played recordings of Reeves and Keller. Keller's voice was already gone, but an old business answering machine recording survived. Ortiz listened. Then he pointed at the speaker. That one. Keller. The identification was not enough for prosecution, but it placed Keller at the payphone. Minutes before Elena received the call, the timeline was tightening. Investigators then examined the mysterious envelope seen by the diner waitress. They could not find the original, but Elena's purse had been recovered from her car. Inside were ordinary items: a wallet, lipstick, receipts, a compact mirror, and a folded piece of paper. The paper had been cataloged in 1986 as miscellaneous. Nobody had examined the writing. Modern enhancement revealed several partial words: garage, records, tonight, and a number. Investigators traced the number. It belonged to Keller's business. Suddenly, the diner meeting looked different. Elena had not simply agreed to meet Keller. She had been summoned. She believed the meeting concerned the records she had discovered. She thought she was going to confront someone. Instead, she walked into a trap. The investigators now reconstructed the likely sequence. Elena received the call. She went to the diner. Keller arrived. He showed her something. Possibly the envelope. Possibly documents. He convinced her to leave with him. Reeves followed. The three vehicles moved toward the eastern road. At some point, Elena's car was abandoned. She was taken elsewhere. The brown pickup traveled toward the maintenance garage. Later, a vehicle entered the canyon, and before dawn, Elena was dead. But the reconstruction contained one major problem. Why would Keller leave his jacket in Elena's car? It made no sense. Unless he had believed the car would never be found, unless he had been forced to abandon it, or unless the jacket had been planted. That possibility changed everything. Investigators examined the jacket again. The biological traces indicated Elena had touched it, but her fibers were concentrated around the sleeve. The pattern suggested she had grabbed Keller during a struggle. If true, the jacket had not been deliberately planted. It had been torn or pulled during an altercation. That explained why Keller had lost it. It also explained why the jacket remained inside the vehicle. The struggle may have happened there. Detectives then analyzed the vehicle's interior. The original photographs were enhanced using modern imaging. A faint smear was visible on the passenger side door. The original investigators had considered it dirt. Modern testing revealed microscopic blood residue. The sample was too degraded for a complete DNA profile, but it matched the blood type associated with Elena. The driver's seat contained another clue, a tiny fragment of dark blue fabric, the same material as Keller's jacket. The picture became clearer. Elena had been inside her own car. Someone had entered the passenger side. A struggle followed. The attacker left the jacket behind. Elena was forced out. Her vehicle was abandoned. Her earrings were scattered nearby. Then the vehicle was moved again. The investigators now believe the scene had been manipulated. Someone wanted police to think Elena had willingly left, but they had made mistakes. Small mistakes. Almost invisible mistakes. Mistakes that became enormous after 39 years. Then detectives found the strangest document in the case, a patrol report from the night of July 18th, Sill, 1986. The report had been filed by Officer Raymond Cole. Cole had written that he observed a male subject standing beside a vehicle. The vehicle was parked near the service road. The subject was wearing dark clothing. The officer approached. The man said he was waiting for a friend. Cole asked for identification. The man provided it. The officer wrote down the name, Thomas Keller. Then came the shock. The report was never included in the main case file. It had been misfiled under a traffic incident. Cole had no idea the missing woman was connected. He had simply encountered Keller less than an hour after Elena disappeared. The officer was dead, but his report remained. That single page changed the timeline again. Keller was not merely near the scene. He had been stopped there. He had been questioned. He had given police his name, and then he was allowed to leave. Why had he been there? He said he was waiting for a friend. Investigators searched the old dispatch log. No friend arrived. No one was reported missing from the area. Keller had simply driven away. That was the moment detectives realized how close the original investigation had come. Police had physically encountered the man they now believed was responsible. They had spoken to him. They had recorded his name. They had even noted his clothing. And still, the case went cold. But there was something else in Cole's report. At the bottom of the page, almost hidden beneath a handwritten correction, were 4 words, strong smell of bleach. That detail had never been mentioned in the original homicide file. Detectives returned to the old garage records. They found purchase invoices for industrial cleaning chemical. Keller had bought large quantities of bleach during the week Elena disappeared, more than his business normally required. The purchase occurred 2 days before the disappearance. Another purchase happened the morning after. Investigators could not prove what the chemicals had been used for, but the pattern was disturbing. They examined Keller's storage records again. The metal trunk photographed years after his death contained cleaning supplies, the old newspaper, the brass key, and a receipt dated July 19th, Sill 1986. The receipt was for a disposal service. The address belonged to Keller's garage. The service had been canceled the same day. Why? Nobody knew. Then the investigators found the person who had placed the order, a former employee. He had been 17 in 1986. His name was Michael Torres. He remembered Keller telling him to remove several heavy bags from the garage. Torres thought they contained spoiled material. He was told not to open them. He loaded them into a truck. He drove them to a disposal site. He never asked questions. For decades, he forgot about it. Until detectives showed him Elena's photograph. Torres began to cry. He said he remembered the date. He remembered the smell. And he remembered Keller standing behind him, watching. The cold case had now crossed another threshold. Too many independent memories pointed toward the same night. Too many pieces connected to the same location. Too many lies surrounded the same people. Yet the final link still belonged to Daniel Reeves, because Keller was dead. Reeves was alive, and Reeves knew exactly what had happened. When detectives confronted him a second time, they did not ask whether he had seen Elena. They asked a different question. Where did you take her? Reeves stared at the table. He said nothing. The detective repeated the question. Still nothing. Then Reeves whispered for words. She was still alive. The room froze. It was the first statement that changed everything. Reeves had not merely admitted seeing Elaine, he had acknowledged that she was alive at some point after the diner. He knew something about what happened after she left, and that meant the investigation had finally moved beyond suspicion. The truth was beginning to emerge from the silence. But Reeves was not finished. He looked at the detectives and said the sentence that had been missing from the case for 39 years. Thomas told me where to take her. And suddenly, the forgotten evidence was no longer forgotten. It was a map, a timeline, a chain of decisions. And at the end of it was the question that had haunted California since 1986. What happened to Elena Marquez after she walked out of that diner? Now, after nearly 4 decades, someone was finally ready to answer. California 1986. Cold case, solved, forgotten evidence, triggers shocking arrest. Thomas told me where to take her. The sentence stayed in the interrogation room long after Daniel Reeves stopped speaking. The detectives did not rush him. They knew the danger of interrupting a confession before it fully formed. For 39 years, Reeves had survived by giving investigators just enough information to keep suspicion away from himself. Now he had finally crossed a line he could not uncross. He had admitted knowing Elena was alive after she left the diner. He had admitted Thomas Keller had given him instructions. And he had admitted he transported her somewhere. But Reeves still insisted he had not killed her. He said Keller had threatened him. He said he was afraid. He said he believed Elena would be released. The detectives did not accept the explanation. Not yet. They needed the location. Reeves stared at the table. His hands trembled. Then he gave them a name. Not a street. Not a building. A canyon. The same canyon marked on the forgotten patrol map from 1986. The same canyon where investigators had eventually discovered Elena's remains. For a moment, nobody spoke. The location had been there from the beginning. The deputy who marked it had died without explaining why. The patrol officer who heard the vehicle had never known what he was hearing. And Reeves had just confirmed that the canyon was part of the plan. Investigators asked him what happened there. He refused. They asked again. He shook his head. I can't say that. Why? Because I wasn't supposed to know. The detectives pressed him. He finally explained that Keller had told him to drive Elena's car away from the diner while Keller followed in the pickup. Reeves claimed he thought Elena was going to be frightened into abandoning the investigation. He said Keller wanted the financial records destroyed. He said nobody was supposed to get hurt. But his story immediately contained a contradiction. If Elena was alive, why had her body been found in the canyon? Reeves looked down. He knew the answer. He simply did not want to say it. The detectives placed photographs on the table. The diner, the service road, the garage, the canyon. Finally, Elena's photograph. Reeves stared at it for several seconds. Then he whispered that Elena had fought back. She had realized something was wrong. She had tried to escape. Keller had grabbed her. Reeves said he panicked. He ran. He left Elena with Keller. That statement changed the legal picture. Reeves was no longer merely a witness. He had admitted being present during the critical moments. He had admitted assisting with the vehicle. And he had admitted abandoning Elena with a man investigators believed intended to kill her. But Reeves insisted there was another person, a third man, someone whose name had never appeared in the original file. The detectives leaned forward. Who? Reeves answered. Frank Dwyer. The name meant nothing. Investigators searched the historical records. Frank Dwyer had worked as a security contractor in 1986. He had been connected to one of the companies Elena was investigating. He had also worked occasional jobs for Keller. And according to payroll records, Dwyer had been paid cash the week Elena disappeared. A new name had entered the cold case, but Dwyer had died in 1994. Again, the investigators were chasing ghosts. They searched his property records, his employment files, his bank accounts, his old vehicle registrations. Then they found something. Dwyer had owned a brown pickup, not the same truck as Keller's, a second truck. The truck had been sold 3 weeks after Elena disappeared. The buyer lived in Nevada. The vehicle was eventually destroyed, but an insurance photograph survived. The truck had a distinctive damaged headlight, the same detail remembered by the gas station attendant. The investigators compared the image. It matched. Suddenly, the story expanded. There had been more than one vehicle, more than one man, and potentially more than one person involved in moving Elena. Reeves had not been telling the entire story. Investigators confronted him with the photograph. He became silent. Then he admitted Dwyer had been there. According to Reeves, Keller had called Dwyer after Elena arrived at the garage. Dwyer was supposed to handle the problem. Reeves refused to explain what that meant. He claimed he never entered the garage, but another piece of evidence contradicted him. The original evidence inventory included a pair of work gloves recovered from the passenger floor of Elena's car. They had been dismissed as common. Modern testing revealed traces of DNA from at least 2 males. One profile was consistent with Keller. The second was incomplete. Investigators could not conclusively identify it as Dwyer, but they now had a reason to believe another person had been inside the vehicle. The gloves were preserved. The vehicle was preserved. The jacket was preserved. And because they had survived, modern science could examine what investigators in 1986 could not. The forensic laboratory tested the gloves again. One glove contained microscopic traces of Elena's blood. The other contained fibers from the carpet in Keller's garage. The gloves had been used during the crime. That conclusion was becoming difficult to avoid. Then investigators found a photograph from inside the garage. It had been taken during an unrelated property inspection in 1987. At the edge of the frame stood a metal drum. Beside it was a workbench. On the workbench sat a stack of paper. One of them appeared to be an invoice from Elena's employer. The photograph was grainy. The writing was impossible to read, but digital enhancement revealed enough. The invoice number matched one of the documents Elena had copied into her notebook. The same number appeared in her financial records. The same number appeared in a payment made to Keller. The same number appeared in a report that Elena had marked as suspicious. The connection was now undeniable. The financial fraud was real. Elena had discovered it. Keller was involved. Reeves was connected. Dwyer was connected. And the disappearance happened immediately after Elena began asking questions. But motive alone could not explain the kill. Investigators needed to know why Elena had become dangerous enough to eliminate. The answer came from a letter found in Elena's apartment. It had never been sent. The envelope was addressed to her supervisor. Inside, Elena had written that she believed company records were being altered. She said she had copied several invoices. She said she was afraid someone might try to destroy the evidence. And she wrote one sentence that stunned investigators. "I think they know that I know." The letter was dated the day before she disappeared. Elena had known she was in danger. She had tried to warn someone, but nobody had acted quickly enough. The detectives now believed the diner meeting had been designed to recover the documents. Keller wanted the copies. Reeves knew where Elena kept them. Dwyer was there to intimidate her. The plan may have been simple. Threaten her. Take the records. Make her afraid. But something went wrong. Elena resisted. She fought, and the situation became deadly. Reeves claimed he fled, but investigators discovered his car had been seen near the garage. A witness remembered the vehicle. The witness had been 17 at the time. He was driving home from work when he saw a dark sedan parked outside the garage. He remembered the license plate. Only 2 numbers. But those 2 numbers matched Reeves's vehicle. The witness had never come forward. He had not known the significance. Now, nearly 40 years later, his memory became another piece of the chain. The detectives returned to Reeves. They showed him the photograph. They showed him the vehicle records. They showed him the witness statement. Reeves stopped denying that he had been at the garage. Instead, he changed his story. He said he had gone there because Keller told him Elena had become violent. He said he was afraid Keller would kill her. He said he wanted to help. But if that were true, why had he not called police? Why had he never told Elena's family? Why had he lied for 39 years? Reeves had no answer. Then investigators asked about the canyon. He said Keller drove there later. Dwyer followed. Reeves stayed behind. The detectives asked how he knew Elena had been taken to the canyon. He said Keller told him. Again, the contradiction. If Reeves had not gone, how could he know unless someone had told him? Or unless he had been there? The detectives pushed harder. Reeves finally admitted he had followed them. He said he stopped near the entrance. He said he saw Keller and Dwyer carry something. He claimed he could not see what it was, but the investigators had already recovered the remains. They knew the truth. Reeves had been closer than he wanted to admit. The question became whether he had participated in the killing. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence. The physical evidence connected Reeves to the scene. The witness testimony placed him there. His own statements placed him there, and his changing story destroyed his credibility. But prosecutors faced another obstacle. The crime had occurred nearly 40 years earlier. Some witnesses were dead. Some records were missing. Memories had faded. Physical evidence had deteriorated. A prosecution built entirely on old evidence would be difficult. Then the laboratory delivered one final result. The biological material recovered from the object near Elena's remains was not merely consistent with Reeves. It contained a partial genetic profile strong enough to establish that Reeves had been in contact with the object. Investigators would not disclose the exact item publicly, but sources connected to the investigation said it was something that had remained in the evidence archive since 1986, something investigators had never considered important, something Reeves had believed would never be tested. The arrest warrant was approved. Reeves was taken into custody at his home. When the news broke, people who had grown up hearing Elena's name began calling one another. The case was solved, or at least one chapter had finally reached an ending. But there was another problem. Thomas Keller was dead. Frank Dwyer was dead. Only Reeves remained. He could be prosecuted. He could be questioned. He could finally be forced to answer. And investigators believed he knew more than he had admitted. The interrogation continued for hours. Reeves eventually asked for water. Then he looked at the detective across from him. "I didn't think she'd ever be found." The detective asked why. Reeves said nothing. Then he added, "The canyon was supposed to be impossible to search." That sentence revealed something critical. The location had been chosen because they believed the terrain would hide Elena permanently. But it had not. Decades later, modern forensic methods found her. And now, the very place chosen to erase her became the place that brought the case back to light. Investigators returned to the canyon one final time. The landscape was quiet. Wind moved through the dry grass. The roads were nearly empty. There was no sign of the panic that had unfolded there in 1986. No headlights. No voices. No struggle. Only the land. And beneath it, the remains of a woman whose family had waited nearly 4 decades for an answer. Elena's disappearance had once been treated as a mystery without direction. Now investigators understood that the truth had been hiding behind a series of ordinary mistakes. A missing interview. A misfiled patrol report. A cassette nobody transcribed. A jacket nobody identified. A receipt nobody questioned. A map nobody explained. A witness nobody called, and evidence that waited patiently while the years passed. The cold case had not been solved by one miraculous discovery. It had been solved because someone finally connected the pieces. The arrest shocked the community. But the greatest shock was something else. The people responsible had never been as far away as everyone believed. They had been living ordinary lives, driving ordinary roads, paying ordinary bills, growing older, watching the case disappear from newspapers, watching Elena's name fade, until one forgotten box was opened, until one old tape was played, until modern DNA technology turned an impossible clue into a connection, and until a 71-year-old man finally admitted what he had spent 39 years denying. Elena had not disappeared. She had been taken. She had been silenced. And someone had spent decades believing the past would remain bare. It didn't. The past was waiting. And when it finally spoke, it spoke through evidence that had never stopped telling the truth. California, 1986. Cold case solved. Forgotten evidence triggers shocking arrest. The confession did not end the investigation. It made the investigation more dangerous. Daniel Reeves had finally admitted that he was there. He had admitted that Thomas Keller gave him instructions. He had admitted that Elena was alive after leaving the diner. But he had still protected one final piece of the story. He refused to say exactly what happened inside the canyon. For detectives, that silence mattered, because Reeves had spent 39 years surviving behind carefully constructed lies. If he was finally talking, every word had to be examined. Every pause, every contradiction, every name. And there was one name he kept avoiding: Frank Dwyer. Investigators knew Dwyer was dead. They knew he had worked for Keller. They knew he had been connected to the companies Elena was investigating. They knew his pickup had been seen near the gas station and the service road, but they did not know what role he played. Reeves finally admitted that Dwyer had been waiting near the canyon. He said Keller had called him from the garage. He said Dwyer arrived shortly afterward. Then the three men drove east. Elena was in Keller's truck. Reeves followed behind. The drive lasted less than 20 minutes. Reeves said Elena was still alive. She was restrained. She was frightened. She kept asking where they were taking her. Keller told her they were going to talk. That was the story Reeves gave investigators. But detectives noticed something immediately. He used the word we, not Keller, not Dwyer, we. It was a small mistake, but it revealed how close Reeves had been to the event. Investigators asked him who had restrained Elena. He refused to answer. They asked who had driven the truck. He said Keller. Who had opened the passenger door? Silence. Who had taken Elena into the canyon? Silence. Then Reeves finally said, all of us. The room changed. For nearly 4 decades, Reeves had insisted he was only a frightened bystander. Now he was admitting participation. Investigators asked what happened next. Reeves said Elena tried to run. He said she made it several yards before Keller caught her. He said she screamed. The detectives asked whether anyone heard. Reeves said there was nobody nearby, but that statement was contradicted by an old report. A rancher had called police that night. He reported hearing a woman screaming somewhere beyond the canyon road. The call had been classified as a possible animal disturbance. The dispatcher wrote, "Caller believes sound may be a coyote." The rancher had disagreed. He had said it sounded human, but nobody investigated. The report sat untouched for decades. Now detectives returned to the rancher's family. The rancher was dead. His daughter remembered the night. She said her father had been disturbed by the sound. He had walked outside. He heard shouting. Then silence. Minutes later, he heard an engine. He described it as a heavy pickup. That matched Keller's vehicle. Another forgotten clue. Another mistake. Another piece of the night returning. Investigators mapped the rancher's property against the location where Elena's remains were found. The distance was less than a mile. Close enough. The original call had occurred around 11:30 p.m. That fit Reeves's revised timeline. It also meant Elena may have been alive much later than investigators had originally believed. The detectives returned to Reeves. They told him about the rancher's call. He closed his eyes. Then he said, "She was fighting." That was the first time he described Elena's final moments without blaming her. He said she had realized they were not going to release her. She tried to run. She scratched Keller. She grabbed at Dwyer. Then Keller struck her. Reeves claimed he did not see what happened afterward, but investigators knew he was lying. The evidence suggested otherwise. Near Elena's remains, they had found fragments of 3 different sets of footwear impressions. One belonged to Keller. One was consistent with Dwyer's work boots. The third had been too degraded for identification, but Reeves had worn a distinctive style of work shoe in 1986. Investigators found an old photograph from the warehouse. He was wearing the same type. It was not enough by itself, but the pattern was growing. 3 men, 1 victim, 1 remote location, 1 secret that survived decades, and 1 question: who actually killed Elena? Reeves blamed Keller. He said Keller was the violent one. He said Dwyer was helping. He said he was terrified. But detectives were not interested in the story Reeves wanted to tell. They were interested in what the evidence showed. The medical examiner's reconstruction suggested Elena suffered a fatal injury before burial. The exact mechanism could not be determined with certainty, but there was evidence of blunt force trauma. The old forensic notes mentioned it. The original investigators had recorded the injuries but could not determine when they occurred. Modern analysis supported the conclusion that the injuries happened around the time of death. That meant Elena had been alive during the confrontation. She had fought. She had resisted. And someone had killed her. Reeves insisted it was Keller, but prosecutors believed Reeves could still be charged as an accomplice. His own words had placed him at the scene. His DNA had connected him to evidence. His vehicle had been seen near the location. His original alibi had collapsed, and his statements had changed repeatedly. The defense would argue that the memories were unreliable. The prosecution would argue that the physical evidence survived even when memories did not. The battle had not yet reached the courtroom, but investigators were still searching. They wanted the original financial records. They wanted proof of motive. They wanted to know exactly why Elena had become a threat. A search of Keller's former business records uncovered a startling document. It was a handwritten ledger. The pages were yellowed. Several names were abbreviated. Numbers appeared beside them. Some were crossed out. One entry carried Elena's initial. Beside them was a date. The date was the day before her disappearance, and beside the date were 2 words. Problem resolved. The handwriting was identified as Keller. It was not a confession, but investigators considered it highly significant because it suggested Keller had already decided Elena was a problem. The financial records provided another connection. Payments had been made to Dwyer. Payments had been made to Reed, and the largest payment came 3 days after Elena disappeared. The money was transferred through a company that existed for only 7 months. Its registered address was a mailbox. Its listed director had no knowledge of the company. The operation was designed to conceal the payments, but the records survived. The account was eventually closed. The bank was absorbed by another institution. The paper records were transferred to an archive, and decades later, investigators found them. The money trail suggested the men had been paid after the disappearance. That raised a disturbing possibility. The killing may not have been spontaneous. It may have been planned. Elena had become a threat. Keller had identified her. Reeves knew what she had discovered. Dwyer had the means to intimidate her, and money moved after she disappeared. The pieces fit, but there was still one missing element. Where were Elena's financial documents? If Keller had killed her to recover evidence, where had that evidence gone? Investigators searched every surviving record from Elena's apartment, her workplace, her car, her storage spaces. Nothing. Then they discovered a note written by Patricia Lane. Lane had kept it for decades. It was a photocopy of a page Elena had given her. The page contained invoice numbers. Several were marked with red ink. At the bottom, Elena had written, "If they ask for these, don't give them the originals." Lane had kept the copy, but the originals were missing. Investigators traced the number. They led to a storage facility in another county. The facility had been demolished years earlier. However, the property owner had kept boxes of abandoned documents. One box contained business paperwork from 1986. Inside was an envelope. Inside the envelope were copies of invoices Elena had been investigating. The documents proved the fraud. They also revealed something far more serious. Payments had been made to a company secretly controlled by Keller. The money had then been distributed. Some went to Dwyer. Some went to Reeves. And one payment went to a person nobody recognized. The name was partially obscured. Investigators enlarged the document. The name became readable. A county official. The implication was enormous. Someone inside local government may have known about the financial scheme. That possibility explained another mystery. Why had so many investigative leads disappeared? Why had Lane never been interviewed? Why had the patrol report been misfiled? Why had the garage never been searched? Why had the evidence inventory contained so many inconsistencies? Was it incompetence? Or had someone interfered? Detectives began reviewing the original case. They discovered that the lead detective had requested a search warrant for Keller's garage. The request was never approved. The reason listed was insufficient, probable cause. The request was signed by a supervisor. That supervisor was later identified as a person who had received money from a company connected to Keller. The supervisor was dead. The paper trail ended there. But the possibility remained. Maybe the investigation had not simply failed. Maybe it had been redirected. That changed the entire case. Detectives now believed Elena's disappearance may have involved people with influence. The original officers were not necessarily corrupt. They may have been given incomplete information. They may have been pushed away from the right suspects. And while they searched fields and roads, evidence was disappearing. The cold case became more than a murder investigation. It became an investigation into the investigation itself. That was when prosecutors decided to examine every surviving piece of evidence. Nothing was considered irrelevant. Not the jacket, not the gloves, not the earring, not the Cosette, not the map, not the invoices, not the patrol report, not even the handwritten correction. One correction in particular caught their attention. A line in Keller's original interview had been crossed out. The question had apparently been, "Did you know Elena Marquez before July 18th?" The answer had been removed. The detective's handwriting was visible beneath the correction. Investigators used forensic document analysis. They enhanced the original page. The answer became partially readable. Yes. One word. Almost erased. But still there. Keller had admitted knowing Elena. The final version of the report said he did not. Someone had changed the statement. The case file had been altered. And that meant the investigation had been compromised from the beginning. The discovery stunned the cold case team. For decades, detectives had believed they were dealing with a mystery. Now they understood something else. The mystery had been manufactured. Evidence had been overlooked. Statements had been altered. Leads had disappeared. And the people responsible had counted on time to destroy what remained. They were almost right. Almost. Because one thing survived. Paper, tape, fabric, DNA, memory. The smallest traces had outlived the people who created them. And now, in 2025, those traces were converging. Reeves had been arrested. Keller was dead. Dwyer was dead. The original investigators were gone. But Elena's story remained. And the deeper detectives went, the more they realized that her murder had never been a simple cold case. It had been a carefully buried secret. A secret protected by silence. A secret protected by mistake. A secret protected by people who believed nobody would ever put the pieces together. But the pieces were finally together. And one question remained. Who changed the original report? Because if investigators could answer that, they might finally understand why Elena's case had remained unsolved for nearly 40 years. California, 1986. Cold case solved. Forgotten evidence triggers shocking arrest. The altered report changed the case again. For 39 years, investigators had believed Thomas Keller denied knowing Elena Marquez. Now they knew that might not have been true. The original question had apparently produced a one-word answer. Yes, someone had crossed it out. Someone had rewritten the statement. Someone had decided that Keller did not know Elena. That single alteration had enormous consequences. If Keller admitted knowing Elena, then his presence at the diner was no longer a coincidence. His meeting with her was no longer unexplained. The envelope on the table was no longer a mysterious object. It meant Keller had a relationship to the victim that investigators had been prevented from seeing. The cold case team began treating the original file as potential evidence of obstruction. Every page was examined. Every correction. Every signature. Every missing attachment. The investigation from 1986 was reconstructed almost like a crime scene. And then they found another altered statement. This one belonged to Daniel Reeves. The original interview contained a question about whether Reeves had ever worked with Keller. The final report said Reeves answered. But beneath the correction, the original handwriting suggested something else. Yes, several jobs. Again, the answer had been changed. 2 suspects. 2 altered statements. 2 connections removed from the official record. That could no longer be dismissed as clerical error. Detectives searched for the officer who had conducted the interviews. He had died in 2008. His surviving family turned over several boxes of professional material. Most contained old photographs and retirement documents. One box contained notebooks. The detective had kept personal field notes from 1986. Inside was a page marked July 19th. 3 names were written across the top: Keller, Reed, Dwyer. Beneath them was a sentence: all 3 appear connected. The official case file contained no such conclusion. The detective had clearly suspected the 3 men. So why did the final report separate them? The notebook contained another entry. Supervisor says stay away from financial angle. That sentence stopped investigators cold. The financial angle had been the reason Elena became vulnerable. It had also been the connection between the 3 suspects. Yet someone had ordered detectives away from it. The cold case team searched personnel records. The supervisor who gave the order was the same official whose name appeared on the old financial records. The same official who had blocked the garage search. The same official who had approved the altered report. He had died decades ago, but his actions could finally be examined. Investigators discovered that he had received payments from one of the companies connected to Keller. The payments were disguised as consulting fees. There was no evidence he personally participated in Elena's murder, but there was evidence he had benefited financially from the network Elena had uncovered. That raised a disturbing possibility. Elena may have been killed because she threatened more than one man. She threatened a system. The detectives returned to Patricia Lane. They asked her about the days immediately before Elena disappeared. Lane remembered Elena making copies, dozens of them. She had hidden documents in several places because she did not trust anyone. One set went to Lane. Another went into Elena's apartment. A third set was supposedly mailed to someone outside California. Investigators asked where. Lane could not remember. Then she remembered an envelope. Elena had addressed it to a newspaper reporter, a reporter who covered financial corruption. The newspaper had closed in the 1990s. Its archives had been donated to a university. Detectives searched the collection. They found Elena's name. Then they found the envelope. It had never been delivered. The address was incomplete, but the contents were still inside. Copies of invoices, bank transfers, company records, and a handwritten letter. Elena described what she had discovered. She believed money was being diverted through fake maintenance contracts. She named Keller. She named Reed. She named Dwyer. And she wrote that she believed someone inside the county was helping protect them. The letter was dated July 17th, Sill 1986, one day before she disappeared. The investigators now had something they had never possessed before: motive, names, documents, and evidence that Elena herself believed she was in danger. The letter also contained one final sentence: if I disappear, it was not voluntary. That sentence became one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the entire case. Elena had predicted what would happen. She had tried to leave a warning, and the warning had remained unread for almost 4 decades. The newspaper archive also contained a photograph. It showed Elena outside her workplace. Standing several feet behind her was Daniel Reed. The photograph had been taken 2 days before her disappearance. Reeves had claimed he had not seen Elena in months. He had lied. Investigators searched the photograph for Keller. He was not visible, but a brown pickup appeared in the background. The license plate was partially readable. It matched Keller's truck. The photograph suggested Elena had been watched. The surveillance may have started before the night she disappeared. Detectives reconstructed the previous week. Keller's truck appeared near Elena's workplace. Reeves appeared near her apartment. Dwyer's truck was seen near the medical supply company. 3 men, 1 target. And Elena was beginning to realize it. Her co-workers remembered that she had started looking over her shoulder. She stopped walking to her car alone. She changed her routine. She asked a friend to stay on the phone while she drove home, but she still went to the diner. Why? Because she believed she was meeting someone who could help. The mysterious phone call may have been made by someone she trusted. Investigators examined the payphone again. Keller had used it. But who told Keller to call? The financial records suggested another possibility: the unidentified county official, the man who had blocked the garage search, the man whose name appeared in the payment record. He had been at a business meeting with Keller earlier that afternoon. His phone records were incomplete, but one call survived. At 8:39 p.m., 4 minutes before Elena's apartment received the mysterious call, a number associated with Keller's business contacted the county official's home. The call lasted less than a minute. Then Keller used the payphone. Investigators could not prove what was said, but the sequence was striking. A call, then another, then Elena leaves home, then the diner, then the disappearance. The old case suddenly had a clock, and the clock pointed toward a coordinated operation. Prosecutors now believed Elena was lured to the diner under false pretenses. The goal was to recover her documents. When she refused, the confrontation became violent. The men moved her. They abandoned the car. They took her to the canyon. And after her death, they attempted to destroy the evidence. But one thing had gone wrong. Elena had hidden copies, and those copies survived. The detectives also discovered that Elena had mailed a second packet. This one had reached its destination. It had been sent to her parent. They had received it 2 days after her disappearance. The package contained financial records. Her father had kept it without understanding its significance. He believed it was related to her work. After his death, the package was placed in storage. Decades later, Elena's family gave it to investigators. Inside was another envelope, and inside that envelope was a handwritten list. 4 names. 3 were familiar: Keller, Reed, Dwyer. The 4th was the county official. Beside each name, Elena had written a number. The numbers corresponded to payments. At the bottom, she had written, "Follow the money." The cold case investigators finally understood why the original investigation had failed. They had searched for a killer. Elena had been pointing them toward a network. She knew money connected the people around her. She knew someone was watching her. She knew someone wanted the records. And she knew that if something happened to her, those records would explain why. But there was still one missing piece. What happened immediately after the diner? Reeves had provided part of the answer. The waitress provided another. The patrol officer provided another. The forensic evidence provided another. But there was one witness nobody had expected: a truck driver. He had been traveling through the Eastern Road shortly after midnight in 1986. His original statement had been brief. He remembered seeing 2 vehicles parked near the canyon. One was a brown pickup. The other was a dark sedan. He also remembered something strange. A man was standing beside the sedan. Another man was walking toward the canyon, and there appeared to be someone in the back of the pickup. The driver never saw a face, but he remembered the sound. A woman shouting. Then a door slammed. Then the pickup disappeared into the darkness. The truck driver had reported the incident, but the statement had been filed under suspicious activity. Not homicide. Not missing person. Suspicious activity. It was never connected to Elena until now. The detectives compared the time. 12:06 a.m. The canyon. The vehicles. The sequence matched. Reeves's story was collapsing again. He had claimed he left before midnight. The witness placed him there after midnight. He had claimed Elena was already gone. The witness heard a woman. He had claimed he did not know what happened. The evidence suggested he knew. Prosecutors prepared additional charges, but detectives wanted one final interview. They placed the witness statement in front of Reed. They played the old Cosette. They showed him Elena's letter. They showed him the financial records. They showed him the photograph. Then they asked one question: "Why did you let her die?" Reeves stared at the table. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then he began to cry. He said Keller told him Elena would destroy all of them. He said Dwyer believed the documents could send them to prison. He said he was afraid. But fear was not the whole story. Reeves admitted he had been paid. He admitted taking money after Elena disappeared. He admitted helping move her car. And finally, he admitted that he knew Elena was going to be killed. He claimed he did not strike the fatal blow. He claimed Keller did. But he was there. He watched. He helped. And then he went home. The detectives asked why he had stayed silent for 39 years. His answer was almost impossible to hear, because every year that passed made it easier. That sentence explained the psychology of the cold case better than any report could. The first year was fear. The 5th year was silence. The 10th year was routine. The 20th year was memory. The 30th year was distance. And eventually, the crime became something that belonged to another lifetime, until the evidence returned, until the names returned, until the family returned, until Elena's photograph appeared again, and the past became present. Reeves was charged. The arrest shocked the community. But prosecutors knew the case would be difficult. The defense would challenge the old memory. They would challenge the DNA. They would challenge the altered report. They would argue that Keller was dead and could not defend himself. They would argue that Reeves was being blamed for a murder committed by someone else. So investigators needed one final thing, a piece of evidence that could place Reeves directly into Elena's final moments. And that evidence was already sitting in the laboratory. It had been recovered from the original crime scene. It had been tested once in 1986. The result had been listed as inconclusive. Now, with modern technology, the laboratory was trying again. The technicians opened the evidence packet. The item was small, almost meaningless. But when the test finished, the result was different. There was a usable genetic profile, a male profile, and it did not belong to Keller. It did not belong to Dwyer. It belonged to Daniel Reeves. For the first time, investigators had physical evidence connecting the surviving suspect to Elena's final location. The forgotten clue had finally spoken, and this time there was nowhere left for Reeves to hide. California, 1986. Cold case solved. Forgotten evidence triggers shocking arrest. The laboratory result arrived before sunrise. One line in a forensic report changed the case. The DNA profile belonged to Daniel Reeves, not Keller, not Dwyer. Reeves, the man who had spent 39 years insisting he was nowhere near Elena Marquez when she disappeared. The man who had built an alibi around an overnight warehouse shit. The man who had claimed he barely knew Thomas Keller. The man who had watched the investigation collapse into silence. His DNA was now tied to evidence recovered from the location where Elena's remains had been discovered. The detectives did not celebrate. They knew better. A cold case can survive one dramatic discovery. A courtroom cannot. The evidence had to be examined again. The laboratory repeated the analysis, then repeated it a third time. The result remained consistent. Reeves was connected. The prosecutors were informed. The case moved from investigation to prosecution. But the detectives still had one problem. They had evidence placing Reeves near Elena. They had his changing statements. They had the financial records. They had witnesses. They had the altered reports. They had the old tape. But they needed to understand exactly what happened in the final hour. Reeves had claimed Keller was responsible. He had claimed Dwyer was involved. He had claimed he was afraid. Now investigators believed he had been more than a frightened accomplice. They believed he had helped make the murder possible. The prosecution built a timeline. July 18th, Sill 1986, 6:12 p.m. Elena leaves work, 6:48 p.m. She stops at a grocery store, 7:19 p.m. She returns home, 8:39 p.m. Keller's business contacts the county official, 8:43 p.m. The mysterious payphone call reaches Elena's apartment, 9:07 p.m. Elena leaves home, 9:31 p.m. She arrives at the diner, 10:04 p.m. She leaves with Keller, 10:17 p.m. Her car is seen leaving the diner, 10:42 p.m. Keller is stopped near the service road, 11:30 p.m. A rancher reports hearing a woman screaming, 12:06 a.m. A truck driver sees two vehicles near the canyon, 2:17 a.m. A patrol officer hears a vehicle entering the canyon. By sunrise, Elena is gone. The timeline was brutal. It showed a narrow window. It showed movement. It showed coordination. And it showed that Reeves had lied about almost every critical moment. Investigators questioned him again. This time, they did not begin with accusation. They began with the evidence. The DNA, the witness, the vehicle, the financial records, the old notebook, the letter. the Cosette. One by one, they placed the pieces in front of him. Reeves stared at them. Finally, he said he wanted to tell the truth, but even then he tried to protect himself. He claimed Keller had recruited him only to scare Elena. He said the plan was to frighten her into handing over the documents. He said nobody intended to kill her. The detectives asked why he had helped move her. He said because Keller threatened him. They asked why he took money. He said because he was paid for transportation. They asked why he never called police. He said he was afraid. Then they asked the most important question. Why did he never tell anyone where Elena was? He had no answer. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Then Reeves finally said that Keller told him the police were already compromised. He claimed Keller knew people inside the county. He claimed that if anyone talked, they would all go to prison. The detectives asked whether Reeves believed that. He said yes, but the investigators had another theory. They believed Reeves stayed silent because he benefited from the silence. The financial records supported it. After Elena disappeared, Reeves received money. Not once, several times. Payments continued for months. He had claimed the money was for legitimate work, but the company that paid him did almost no legitimate business. Its accounts were eventually empty. Then the company vanished. The financial trail ended, but the payments remained. And now prosecutors had a possible motive for Reeves's silence. He had not merely been afraid, he had been bought. The next step was to identify exactly what Elena had discovered. The financial documents revealed a network of fake maintenance contracts. Companies billed one another. Money moved through accounts. Then it was withdrawn in cash. The system had operated for years. Elena had found it because several invoices did not match delivery records. She had started tracing them. The trail led to Keller, then Reeves, then Dwyer, then the county official. The network had several layers, but Elena had come dangerously close to the center. The prosecutors believed her death was intended to stop her from exposing it. The evidence suggested that her documents were the real target. The murder was the final step when intimidation failed. But there was another shocking discovery. Investigators found that Elena had attempted to contact a federal agency. The call was never completed. She had written down a number on the back of one of her notes. The number belonged to an investigator who had been assigned to financial crime. He was no longer alive, but his old case logs survived. One entry mentioned Elena's company. The investigator had received an anonymous tip. The tip claimed that someone inside the medical supply industry was laundering money. The date of the tip was July 17th, Sill, 1986, one day before Elena disappeared. The caller was anonymous, but the phone number used was a public payphone, the same gas station, the same location from which Keller later called Elena. Investigators now believed Elena may have tried to report the scheme before she died. Someone else may have warned authorities, but the warning never reached the right people. The investigation moved too slowly, and Elena vanished. The cold case team began asking a terrifying question. Had the murder been prevented if one person had listened? There was no answer, only the evidence. And the evidence showed how many opportunities had been missed. Elena warned her coworker. She wrote a letter. She copied documents. She tried to contact investigators. She left names. She left numbers. She left instructions. But none of it stopped what happened. The people who killed her did not erase everything. They only needed to erase enough. For years, that was enough. Then technology changed. DNA testing became more sensitive. Digital enhancement made old documents readable. Financial archives became searchable. Telephone records resurfaced. And suddenly, evidence that had once been useless became powerful. The prosecutors prepared the case. Reeves's defense attorneys argued that the DNA did not prove murder. That was true. DNA could place him near evidence. It could not tell the entire story, but the prosecution had more. It had Reeves's own statements. It had the timeline. It had witnesses. It had financial payments. It had the altered reports. It had the old detective's notebook. And it had Elena's letter. The defense would have to explain all of it. Meanwhile, investigators continued searching for the missing financial documents. One invoice contained a handwritten notation. FD. Investigators believed it referred to Frank Dwyer. Another contained Dr. Daniel Reeves. Another contained TK. Thomas Keller. The initials appeared beside payments. That pattern was difficult to explain. Then the detectives found one final notation. After Friday. The date was July 18th. The day Elena disappeared. The investigators believed it referred to the planned operation. The money was ready. The documents were the target. The men knew Elena was asking questions. Everything had been arranged. But the plan had one unpredictable fact. Elena refused to cooperate. She fought, and she survived long enough to leave evidence behind. The detectives now returned to the diner. The building had changed owners. The original dining room was gone, but an old photograph from 1986 showed the interior, the booth where Elena sat, the window, the counter, the entrance, the parking lot. The waitress remembered where Keller had been sitting. She remembered the envelope. She remembered Elena's expression. And she remembered one final detail. When Elena walked outside, she looked back through the window. She looked directly at the waitress. The waitress interpreted the expression as confusion. Decades later, she understood it differently. Elena looked afraid, as if she knew something was wrong, as if she wanted someone to stop her. But nobody did. The waitress watched her disappear into the parking lot. She never saw her again. That memory became one of the most painful moments in the reopened investigation, because the answer had been standing inside that diner. A woman was frightened. A man was waiting. A vehicle was outside, and nobody knew what they were witnessing. The case moved toward court. Reeves remained in custody. His attorneys continued challenging the evidence. They argued that the DNA sample had been contaminated. Laboratory officials rejected the claim. They argued the witnesses were too old. Prosecutors acknowledged that memories fade, but they pointed to physical evidence. They argued the witnesses were not the foundation. They were confirmation. The DNA was one piece. The financial records were another. The altered reports were another. The timeline was another. And Reeves's own statements connected them. The prosecution had something stronger than a single clue. It had convergence. Different evidence. Different sources. Different decades. All pointing toward the same conclusion. Reeves had been involved. The trial date was eventually scheduled. But before proceedings began, prosecutors offered Reeves an opportunity to tell the full story. No more half-truths. No more blaming Keller. No more protecting Dwyer. Tell them what happened to Elena. For several days, Reeves refused. Then he changed his mind. He requested one final interview. The detectives entered the room. A recorder was turned on. Reeves looked older than he had during the previous interrogation. His hands were shaking. He asked whether Elena's family would hear the record. The detective said they might. Reeves looked down. Then he began. He said Elena had been taken to the garage. He said the documents were demanded. He said she refused. He said Keller became violent. Dwyer tried to restrain her. Reeves stood nearby. Then Elena looked directly at him. She called him by name. That was the moment Reeves remembered most clearly. She knew him. She knew he had betrayed her. And she asked him why. Reeves said he had no answer. He said he could not look at her. He turned away. Then he heard the sound of the struggle. When he looked back, Elena was on the ground. Keller was standing over her. Dwyer was holding the documents. Reeves claimed he thought she was unconscious. Keller told him she was dead. Then the three men moved her. They took her to the canyon. Reeves said he drove Elena's car. Keller drove the pickup. Dwyer followed. They stopped near the canyon. Elena was carried into the darkness. Reeves said he stayed near the vehicles. He heard Keller and Dwyer arguing. Then there was silence. Later, Keller returned alone. He told Reeves the problem was finished. Reeves drove away. The detectives asked what happened to the documents. Reeves said Keller kept them. They asked what happened to the money. Reeves admitted he was paid. Then came the final question. Did you know she was going to die? Reeves closed his eyes. After several seconds, he answered, yes. The recording stopped. For the investigators, the case was finally complete. Not because Reeves had told them everything. He hadn't. But because the essential truth was now supported by evidence. Elena had been targeted. She had been lured. She had been confronted. She had resisted. She had been killed. And Daniel Reeves had been there. The arrest that shocked California was no longer based on a forgotten suspicion. It was built on 39 years of evidence. The old case had finally caught up with him. But for Elena's family, the word solved carried a complicated meaning. A solved case could not give them back the year. It could not erase the empty chair. It could not restore birthdays. It could not return a daughter to her parents. It could only answer one question. What happened? For decades, that question had remained unanswered. Now it had an answer. And the answer had been waiting in a cardboard box. California 1986, cold case solved, forgotten evidence triggers, shocking arrest. The word solved appeared in the case file for the first time in nearly 4 decades. But nobody in the room treated it like a victory. There was no celebration, no applause, no sense that the story had finally reached a clean ending. Because solving a murder does not erase the murder, it only removes the darkness surrounding it. For Elena Marquez's family, the truth arrived carrying almost as much pain as relief. They finally knew she had not abandoned them. She had not disappeared by choice. She had not started another life somewhere beyond California. She had been taken. She had fought. She had been betrayed by people she knew. And for years, those people had lived ordinary lives while her family waited for answers. Now prosecutors had the evidence. Daniel Reeves was charged as a participant in Elena's murder. The case against him rested on decades of accumulated evidence. His DNA, his changing statements, his connection to Keller, the financial payments, the witnesses, the vehicle sightings, the recovered documents, and most damaging of all, his own final statement. But Reeves's attorneys immediately attacked the prosecution's case. They argued that the evidence was too old. They argued that Keller was dead and could not be questioned. They argued that Dwyer was dead. They argued that witnesses could no longer remember events accurately. They argued that Reeves's confession had been influenced by investigators, and they questioned whether the DNA proved anything beyond contact. The prosecution expected those arguments. They had spent months preparing for them. They did not need every witness to remember every detail. They needed the evidence to convert. The DNA placed Reeves near the critical evidence. The financial records established motive. The witnesses established movement. The patrol reports established the timeline. The altered documents established the original investigation had been compromised. The cassette established that Keller had lied. The detective's notebook established that investigators had suspected all 3 men in 1986. And Elena's own letters established that she believed she was in danger before she disappeared. Then there were the remains. 39 years underground. 39 years hidden beneath a landscape that had changed around them. Forensic specialists examined Elena again. They reconstructed what they could. The remains showed evidence of trauma. Some details were lost forever. Time had taken them. But not everything. A small fragment of material recovered with the remains was examined again. It contained microscopic traces. Investigators compared those traces with objects from the original evidence archive. One matched the interior fabric of Keller's truck. Another matched material from the garage. A third contained biological material consistent with Elena. The evidence was old, but it had survived. That became the theme of the entire prosecution. Survival. Evidence had survived. Records had survived. Photographs had survived. Witness memories had survived. Even Elena's handwriting had survived. The truth had survived. The people who tried to bury it had not. Thomas Keller was dead. Frank Dwyer was dead. The county official suspected of interfering with the original investigation was dead. Several original detectives were dead. Even some of the witnesses were gone. But their records remained. And those records now spoke for them. The prosecution presented the history of the investigation. In 1986, Elena disappeared. In 1987, the case stalled. By 1990, the evidence was aged. By 2000, the case was considered inactive. By 2010, most of the original investigators were retired. Then came the cold case review. then the evidence box, then the jacket, then the DNA, then the old Cosette, then the financial records. One discovery triggered another. The case had not been solved by luck. It had been solved because investigators refused to accept that an old case had to remain an old mystery. The defense argued differently. They claimed investigators were connecting unrelated events because they already believed Reeves was guilty. They said the old evidence had been interpreted through modern assumptions. They pointed to the missing body for decades. They questioned the reliability of witnesses who were now elderly. They questioned the altered report. They questioned the financial records. But the prosecution had something the defense could not explain. Reeves had admitted knowing Elena was going to die. That statement had been recorded. He had described events that matched physical evidence. He knew details that had never been publicly released. He knew the canyon. He knew the garage. He knew how Elena's car had been moved. He knew what happened to the documents. And he knew that Elena had fought. Those details were not easily explained away. The trial began with a photograph, not the crime scene, not the evidence. Elena herself. She was smiling, young, alive. The prosecutor told the jury that the case was not about a mysterious woman who vanished in 1986. It was about a person, a daughter, a co-worker, a friend, a woman who had discovered something dangerous and tried to expose it. Then came the evidence. The jury heard the original 911 and dispatch records. They heard the rancher's report. They heard the truck driver's statement. They heard the diner waitress describe the man who sat across from Elena. They heard Patricia Lane describe Elena's fear. They saw the old photograph of Keller's truck near Elena's workplace. They saw the financial documents. They saw the handwritten ledger. They saw Elena's warning. If I disappear, it was not voluntary. The courtroom became silent. That sentence had been written before the murder. Elena had known something was wrong. She had tried to protect herself, but she could not know how little time remained. The prosecution then introduced the evidence from the canyon. The defense objected. The judge allowed it. Photographs were displayed. The jury saw the recovered remains. They saw the location. They saw the map. Then the prosecution played Reeves's final interview. His voice filled the courtroom. I knew she was going to die. The sentence landed harder than any photograph. For 39 years, the case had been built around uncertainty. Now the jury heard the surviving suspect acknowledge the essential truth. He knew. He was there. He participated. He remained silent. The defense argued that Reeves had been coerced by Keller. They argued he had been a frightened young man manipulated by stronger personality. But the prosecution returned to one fact. Reeves had not remained silent for a few months. He had remained silent for 39 years. He had watched Elena's family search. He had watched police investigate. He had watched the case disappear. He had built a life. And he had never told anyone where Elena was. The jury deliberated. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. The story had become national news. California's forgotten murder had suddenly become one of the most discussed cold cases in the country. Headlines appeared everywhere. A 1986 disappearance solved. Forgotten evidence leads to arrest. 39-year mystery finally broken. Family gets answers. But inside the courtroom, Elena was not a headline. She was a person, and her family was waiting. The verdict came after several hours. Guilty. The word was spoken quietly. There was no dramatic reaction from Reed. He lowered his head. For a moment, he looked like an old man. Not the man from the photograph. Not the young man who had stood beside Keller. Just an old man confronting the consequences of something that had happened almost 40 years earlier. Elena's relatives cried. Some embraced. Others simply sat still. Her niece later said that the verdict felt strange. She had spent most of her life knowing Elena only through photographs. The verdict did not bring Elena back, but it finally gave her family permission to stop wondering. The investigation did not end with the conviction. Detectives continued examining the financial network. They wanted to understand how the original investigation had been weakened. The altered reports raised serious questions. Who changed them? Who ordered detectives away from the financial records? Who blocked the garage search? Who approved the misleading statements? The answers were incomplete. The county official who appeared in the financial records was dead. His surviving documents did not prove that he ordered a cover-up, but investigators found enough evidence to conclude that the original investigation had been seriously compromised. Not every failure was deliberate. Some were mistakes. Some were poor communication. Some were caused by the technology of the time. But some decisions could no longer be explained as simple error. The financial trail had been ignored. Key witnesses had not been interviewed. The garage had not been searched. The connection between Keller, Reeves, and Dwyer had been buried, and the original report had been altered. The case became a lesson in how cold cases can be created, not always through one massive failure, sometimes through dozens of small ones. A missed phone call, a forgotten witness, a report placed in the wrong folder, a piece of evidence labeled insignificant, a question that was never asked. Each mistake seemed harmless. Together, they created 39 years of silence. The most haunting discovery came after the trial. Investigators found one final photograph. It had been stored with Keller's business records. The photograph showed the maintenance garage in July 1986. In the background was Elena's car. The image had apparently been taken before the official search began. That meant someone connected to Keller had photographed the vehicle. Why? Nobody knew. But the timestamp placed the photograph within hours of Elena's disappearance. It was another forgotten piece of evidence. Another fragment. Another silent witness. The photograph was eventually added to the case archive. Elena's family received a copy. They did not display it. Instead, they kept the photograph beside the others. A picture of Elena smiling. A picture from her workplace. A picture from college. And now, one final image from the night her life ended. For decades, her family had lived with an empty space. Now they had the truth. It was painful. It was incomplete. But it was real. The case that began with an unlocked car and a missing woman ended with a courtroom conviction. But the most powerful evidence was never the confession. It was the accumulation. A jacket, a cassette, a map, a notebook, a letter, a photograph, a DNA profile, a financial record, a witness who remembered, and an evidence box that waited longer than anyone expected. The people who buried Elena believed the passage of time would protect them. They were wrong. Time had not destroyed the evidence. It had preserved it. The technology changed. The investigators changed. The witnesses aged. The buildings disappeared. But the evidence remained. And eventually someone opened the box. Someone listened to the tape. Someone looked again at the jacket. Someone asked why the report had been altered. Someone followed the money. Someone believed the missing woman deserved another investigation. That was enough. 39 years after Elena walked out of the diner, the silence finally broke. Her family no longer had to ask whether she had chosen to disappear. They knew she had not. Her name no longer belonged to a missing person post. It belonged to a solved murder case. But even after the conviction, one truth remained darker than the verdict itself. Elena had tried to warn everyone. She had written down names. She had copied records. She had hidden evidence. She had left instructions. She had even written what should happen if she vanished. And still, nobody was able to save her. That is what makes the case so haunting. Not simply that a woman was murdered, but that she saw the danger coming. She left clues. She tried to protect the truth. And the truth survived long enough to protect her memory. Nearly 40 years later, the forgotten evidence finally did what the original investigation could not. It spoke. And when it did, the silence around Elena Marquez was over.